Good morning. Welcome to the Science Mind class. I'm Dr. Petra, and we have folks in the room and we have folks online this morning as we are in our Science Mind general summary. We're on page 393 and 394, and we are walking through the summary of the philosophy. And Science of Mind, we call ourselves a philosophy, a faith, and a way of life. And so that's what we're exploring in the first part of this general summary, the philosophy. So we've talked about oneness, and we've talked about conscious mind, and we've talked about subjective mind and universal subjective mind. We've talked about universal law. And now we're going to talk about, where does the stuff come from? If everything starts with an idea or an impulse of life, and there's a universal law that creates, where does the stuff come from? We hinted at this a little bit last week, right? If you go back to the ancient Hebrew mystics in the Old Testament, in the Hebrew Bible, they say that God took the dust, breathed on it, and voila, humanity was created. Well, you know, where does the dust come from? Where does all that stuff come from? So the way we language that in the Science of Mind, here, this is the second full paragraph on page 393. The invisible essence of mind is substance. That is an unformed stuff, an energy. It is energy plus intelligence. Intelligence is conscious energy working upon unformed substance in accord with law. Now, if you just read those sentences, like, what? What are we talking about? How is that even possible? How do we have an intangible, immutable law and a mind, which then becomes something? And all we have to do is fast forward from when the Science Mind was written to, well, actually, we don't have to fast forward. At the same time, what was coming about was the introduction and the understanding of quantum physics. And quantum physics says something surprisingly similar, that there is a field, the field of energy, and a field that is moving. It's moving with waves, and somehow that field of waves pops into existence as a particle. And it does so in some lawful and orderly manner. It pops into existence based on a probability field, the probability of where the particle will show up. And there is some systematic understanding of where it's going to pop in, even though there's absolutely no understanding of how the quantum field becomes the individualized particle of something. And yet that something is literally made out of the quantum field, this wave energy, this energy that is moving, and that is, it's the fabric of the space-time continuum. An unformed stuff, an energy plus intelligence. Intelligence is conscious energy working upon unformed substance in accord with law. Now, anytime we're reading any spiritual text, any sacred text, any text that's trying to explain the nature of reality, and it is more than 100 years old or approaching 100 years old, it's always going to have old science in it, right? Because science is always exploring and learning new and finding a more refined way of answering the question, what is this? Right? Science asks the question, what is this? Philosophy asks the question, how does it become what it is? And religion asks the question, why? Why, how, and what are all, right? It's all trying to get at the same thing. What is going on? Right? What is going on? How did it get here? What is its point and purpose? And each one takes a slightly different tack. And in the science of mind, what we recognize is they're not talking about separate things. These questions are not talking about separate things, and the answers aren't talking about separate things, but are describing it from the answer to a slightly different question that's being asked, right? As I said, religion is asking the question why, philosophy is asking the question how, and science is asking the question what. What is it? And so what we have here in this map of the nature of reality is really an understanding that all of it goes together. And that it is in the knowingness, it is in the understanding that that's a whole explanation. You need all of it to make a whole explanation. And of course, Ernest Holmes, in writing The Science of Mind 100 years ago, was really following an intuitive line that has in fact been evidenced in all of the traditions and in the mystery schools and beginning in science, all of that, and is trying to give language to something just as science is starting to catch up. So we see this all the time, and so what we want to do is not throw the baby out with the bathwater, not go, well, this doesn't make any sense, I don't get it. But try to imagine what is being described and how might we today get a hold of that same thing. So another thing the science mind will say is that life makes the physical universe out of itself. Spirit makes all of this, the impulse of life for expression, makes all of this out of itself. So the quantum field is also that which out of which everything is made. It's the intelligence that's there. And somewhere there's an impulse that causes that field, that wave, to turn into a particle. And from a metaphysical point of view, the answer to what causes it to move from a wave into a particle, the answer is always consciousness. Whether that is the consciousness of the whole, of the infinite one, the oneness that is the cosmos, or whether that is the consciousness of an individual. When we make a demand upon ourselves or upon the universe which flows through the self, we are making a demand upon original mind and original energy, or we might say original consciousness and original energy. Thus our demand causes original mind and energy to produce certain things for us. Thus is a new creation produced by the same creative force or energy that produces all things. And so we can see that we're engaged in the exact same creative process. We're using the exact same laws, and we're making it out of the exact same stuff. That infinite, energetic intelligence, right? Which another way we can talk about it is when the physicists talk about photons of light and the energy that a photon of light is, and ultimately that energy or that photon of light is a packet of information, which isn't really anything at all, is it? Right? You can't measure information. You can't put it on a scale. You can't say this information weighs 0.00001 milligram, right? It's not anything at all, and yet it's identifiable. And a packet of information is what? It's the intelligent direction, description. What do we want to say? Instructions, that's the word I want. It's like the instructions that come with your IKEA thing that you're going to build, only hopefully they're a little better. You actually get to the end result from them, right? But they aren't anything at all. Now, I cannot bend my mind around how a photon of light is actually energy, although I intellectually understand that. But I can't even understand the idea that it's an actual packet of information. So I just play with it. What does that mean? What might that imply? How does that work? And we recognize that that's really what's being described by metaphysicians. So the thing we want to remember here, if we go to the next paragraph, is that no form is permanent. No form is permanent. All forms return into the formless. Only the form is eternal. All form is temporary. Right? And the Hindus have been saying this for 10,000 years. And we say it too in the popular phrase, what's the only constant in life? Change. Right? The only constant in life is change. And that means the physical universe, forms, are forever and constantly changing. It's only the design that stays the same. It's only the way in which forms come about that stay the same. That's what's the formless. That's what's the intangible laws, right? They stay the same while forms come and go. And so our job is not to try to make forms permanent, but to recognize that we can always call new forms into existence. So here's what I love this. I love this. There is an eternal play of life upon itself. This is necessary in order that consciousness may be expressed. We are an expression of the original consciousness, and we can call temporary forms into being if we will it. Indeed, we cannot stop doing this. And thereby hangs the tale of good and evil. So we are constantly bringing forms into existence. Constantly bringing forms into existence, whether they're the physical form of a table and chair, whether they're forms of government, forms of society, forms of family, forms of work, forms of clothing. We are continually bringing forms into existence. And these forms, none of them are permanent. They are also continually changing. And the question is, are we consciously engaged in bringing these forms about? Are we paying attention to that's what's happening? And are we bringing about forms that are in alignment with that spiritual truth, with the kind of reality that we actually want to create, that we actually want to live in, that actually is a outpicturing of the idea of oneness, that we're all part of this larger reality, and that all of creation is intended to be a joyful expression of life. Are our forms in alignment with that or not? Right? That's where the question of good and evil hangs, not whether God or something out there decides it's good and evil, but whether it's actually furthering the impulse of life or whether it's getting in the way or, quite frankly, doing damage, right? So the war, racism, sexism, the environmental degradation, power, greed, all these things, we get to ask ourselves, what forms are we creating, and are they in alignment with spiritual truth, or quite frankly, are they just what we want or what we think we need, based on maybe fear, maybe I got to get mine before you get yours, maybe old unconscious ideas based on who knows, all kinds of things. So I think this is really important. We call temporary forms into being if we will. Well, the truth is, we cannot stop doing this. So we are forever calling forms into being, forever. Just the way you decorate your house and the way you walk into it with the energy that you are expressing, the way that you construct a business, the way that you construct your life, the things that you are engaged in, that you are contributing to over and over and over again, these are creating and participating in creating forms. The question is, are we conscious about it? So again, going back to the idea that the entire reason that we try to build a map of the nature of reality is simply so that we can understand what's going on and consciously engage in it, right? Before the apple dropped and Newton had the idea of the law of gravity, gravity was still there, but there was no way to harness it because there was no understanding of what it was. The moment that the law of gravity was revealed as having always been there, in that moment, space flight was possible. Do you see? And a whole host of new forms became available to be created because the nature of reality was revealed. It wasn't started. The law of gravity didn't start in that moment. It had always been there. But by being able to see it, begin to learn about it, how it moves and works, and how it then, of course, works with other laws, the law of aerodynamics and all kinds of things, right? They begin to build on each other. And it's because we understand it and start using it that we can actually create a whole host of new forms. And those forms are in alignment with the nature of reality that we're beginning to understand. Computers, most of our computers are all moving to work on from quantum computation. And so I don't know how that works. Actually, the truth is, I'm not sure I actually understand how the inside of my computer works. And yet, I can understand it enough to use it. So the idea that we have to completely comprehend all of this is crazy. Somebody's going to comprehend the computer, somebody's going to comprehend space travel, somebody's going to comprehend quantum physics to the best of our ability, and we're going to understand it at the level that we can, and we are going to learn the practical application and how to use it. This is why it is so important for us to understand as much of the nature of reality as we can get our minds around. And then to begin to show ourselves how it works. Like, I don't know that I completely and fully grasp the law of gravity and all of its implications, but the more that I learn about it and the more that I see its effects, the more and more and more of the law of gravity I understand. You see? So, we cannot help but use this. Okay. Yeah, I want to stop there because we're going to then go on to the next kind of thought around all of this. So I want to stop there. One of the, so I guess I'm not sure if I have a question or a statement here. One of the reasons why I think that this is so important is if we recognize that forms are temporary. I mean, even eons of geological time in the nature of the timeless is temporary, right? Can we get that? Even 4 billion years is temporary in the eons of infinite and eternal reality. So one of the reasons why I think this is so important is I think that this is the key to getting unstuck. If we feel as though we're stuck in our lives personally, or we feel as though certain things about our world won't change, can't change, it's inevitable that it doesn't change, do you see? That is fundamentally nonsense. Because the nature of anything in the space-time continuum is to change. And I find this understanding the most potent way of combating any time that I feel stuck or I feel as though the things that I'm seeing in the world, the war in Ukraine, as it's inevitable. Well, that's just the way it is. People go to war. Or however we say, it's inevitable that people behave this way. It's inevitable. There's nothing we can do about it. Do you see, when we understand that the nature of form is temporary, there's always something we can do about it. Always. No matter what level the form exists, whether it exists as a biological reality in our bodies or an ephemeral form in society or anything in between. So I take great comfort in that, and I feel empowered by it. So how does that sit with you? What do you think about this? And what does it let you get a hold of if we really begin to grasp the concept that no matter what form it is, it's changing, and that we're, well, that's why we call it co-creating, right? Forms are always the result. All right, so we're going to stop there. We're going to turn to those people here in the room. We're going to turn to Ryan. He's going to talk to you who are online, and we're going to see what comments, thoughts, questions you have. Good morning, Ryan.
Well, good morning, Petra, and good morning to everybody here in the room with us and those who are online via Zoom and Facebook. Welcome. And so, yeah, this is an interactive discussion. We encourage participation, and we want to celebrate that together by doing it in a couple different ways. For those who are in the room, everybody just raise your hand. Everybody raise your hand.
Practicing, we're practicing.
I'm just making sure that your hands work. Last week they didn't work so well. Jerry, I'm going to point at you, Jerry. Just kidding. So everybody here in the room, just raise your hand, and I can, and Richard, the iconic Richard over here, will help grab a microphone for you, or I'll bring one to you as well. And that way, the people online can hear you and hear your questions. And then for those who are here on Zoom, you can go ahead and hit the raise your hand icon. Let's see everybody on Zoom hit the raise your hand icon. I made everybody in the room do it. So let's see.
That's right, you guys practice too.
I see some people doing it. Okay. Great. So everybody who has their hand raised here in the Zoom room, you know how to do it. You hit the raise your hand option located down below on your screen. And those who are here in the Facebook, let's see if you can use your chat option. Why don't you put hello and where you're from inside of the chat on our Facebook to make sure that's working correctly. And leave your questions or comments there, and I can bring those into the room as well. Looks like we have a few people on chat too from all over the world. Isn't that great how technology brings the whole world together? And speaking of that, that's kind of my illustration of form, right? We didn't know what was going to happen pre-COVID, and we were talking about this before we started the Science of Mind class today. And look at the form it's taken. Now we're sitting here in this hybrid, weird world, but people all around the world can connect and communicate and share those ideas. So do we want to poll the room? Does anybody in here have a question first? Oh. Okay.
Right here, and
iconic.
Okay, we have two questions, and so just remember to say your name.
Yes, thank you.
Right here, and then we'll go to Alex.
Hi, I'm Willie, and I don't really know what I want to say about it, but I think the pandemic was a real big example of just exactly what you were talking about.
Yes.
That things are going to change, and you have to decide how they're going to change and how you're going to adapt to that and go with that. And I mean, I find myself having to form new habits.
Yes.
Because I formed some really strange habits during the pandemic, you know, and I'm not sure those are worth continuing. So, you know, just that.
Yes. Good. Thank you, Willie. You say something really important. Really, 2.5, 3 years ago, could you have imagined that everybody would just go home?
No.
Like, could you imagine, like, if you'd have thought about it, if everybody would have just gone home, everybody would have thought that, you know, life would have stopped. And of course, everybody didn't go home. We know that all of our essential workers and first responders and nurses and doctors did not get to go home. And we're super, super, super grateful And sorry that so many of you have been the brunt of really unacceptable behavior. But we couldn't have imagined it, right? And it scrambled. Everybody scrambled. Everybody scrambled. How do we do our jobs? How do we stay connected? How do we get our groceries? Businesses had to figure out how to actually continue to serve people so they didn't fold. Unfortunately, of course, many did fold. And so we had to learn boatload of new things. And some of them are very worthwhile bringing into this new, and some of them, Willie, as you said, are not. Maybe that, constant snacking that we could do out of the refrigerator, or the not wanting to get dressed in the morning, and so now not wanting to go back into the office, or whatever it is, right? But I think the point is that we can at any moment consciously ask ourselves, are these forms, are they in alignment with my life? Do they fulfill me? Do they allow me to make a contribution, right? Or is it just a habit? So many forms are just habits. And that's our annual theme, Sacred Disruption, Reimagine Everything. Because we've been so disrupted, we have the opportunity to consciously get a hold of this now. As life begins to move again in a big way, we get to ask ourselves, what forms do we want to recreate, create new, engage with new? What habits that we got into do we want to release and let go of? And wouldn't it be good for us to be able to grow and move forward without crisis? And of course, a lot of us are in the habit of creating crisis and trauma because it's the only way we know how to move things forward. And just being conscious of it will make a big difference. So thank you, Willie. Absolutely. All right, we have one more hand in the room.
My name's Alexander. I don't really know how to phrase this, but just going back to like the particle, changing from wave into particle, and that we need a consciousness or an intelligence to orchestrate that. And I've really been doing a lot of research, reading, whatnot, on like self-will, and like free will, just like stuff like that. And it just begs the question, like, is a particle predetermined, like, by an intelligence to go through all of these different stages? Like the table, for example, as it starts off, in a seed and grows into the tree, and the particle itself goes through transformation over time, or like, a blood cell in our system or whatever, all of the process that it goes. I mean, is it just predetermined? And
it's a great question, right?
Yeah.
It's a great question. So the answer to that is actually no, right? Because the particle is not predetermined where it's going to land. It's all based on probability. And what's even weirder is that right now, while we sit here, not only are we exchanging photons of energy, we're actually exchanging electrons. So the electron that winked into existence, into a carbon atom in my body at some point along the way, may easily wink into existence as an oxygen, as a part of an oxygen atom in yours. Okay, I don't actually know if H2O are particles that are within a carbon atom. So I didn't actually pull the periodic table out to make sure that my analogy would work. So let's be clear about that. But do you see that there's at this fundamental level, things are moving and exchanging and changing and whatever. So the question is, what keeps the form in shape? If these things are moving, what keeps it in shape? And metaphysics would argue what keeps it in shape is the idea that the conscious intelligence has of the expression of life. And the paradox, of course, is that while the atom or the electron or the particle may not have free will, because essentially what it's doing is responding to the intelligent nature of its own lawful action, right? At some point, consciousness becomes self-aware. And in that self-awareness, one of the most fundamental attributes of self-awareness is the ability to choose. Without the ability to choose, we have no free will. And there is a huge, gigantic, enormous philosophical, religious, and scientific conversation about how is that possible? How is it possible? And yet, without that, we are not self-aware. Right? So if we are going to assume that somehow there's something predetermined or predestined that robs us of our free will, no matter how you couch it. And then then we can, well, basically, I say, then we don't have to be responsible for anything. Right? Because if I don't have free will, I'm not responsible. And then I can say the devil made me do it, or I can say it was the will of God, or I can say, well, it's just karma. There's lots and lots and lots of ways that I can say I was predestined, or that there was some outside agency that actually caused this to happen. And I get to then be a victim, but that also means I've utterly given up any responsibility, but also then any ability to create something, to actually be an agent in my own life. And that's what it means to be self-aware, to recognize that we are the universal individualizing itself so that it can experience itself as creative. That's our option. The problem, of course, is thereby hangs the take of good and evil, right? Because we can behave poorly, can't we? And we can behave destructively, and we can behave hatefully, and we can behave in ways that are heinous and hurtful. If we can't, we don't have free will, right? And so the metaphysics would argue too, or would suggest that the whole point then is that we are learning from our choices. Is it life furthering, or is it life constricting? Is it life enhancing, or is it life destroying? And only those things that actually are life furthering are actually in alignment with spiritual truth. We would call that love, right? Thanks, Alexander. Thanks for your, and did you have something else? Yeah,
One more
sure.
quick question.
And then we're going to come online.
Would you say that we're all alchemists to some degree because we're always transforming life, or like transforming, whether it's for good or evil, and change is constant, the only constant in the universe, then are we just transforming, whether it's spiritually, physically, whatever?
Yes, I think that's that's why the alchemists was so much interested in alchemy for so long, right? Because that's what we're doing. And we're like, it's self-awareness. And human beings aren't obviously the only place where self-awareness has arisen in the multiverses, or certainly in our universe. But we're just going to keep it right here. Self-awareness in the human being, right? We become the fulcrum point where that co-creative process, where the intelligence and the impulse and the out-picturing form, we're the fulcrum, we're the place where we can actually see both and be aware of both and be awake. And to me, that's what the alchemists, that was how you turned lead into gold. It wasn't actually turning lead into real gold, right? It was turning the difficulties and challenges of life and the feeling of being small, stuck, and human into the gold of knowing how the nature of reality actually works. And so we're always manipulating the Play-Doh of the universe, right? Because we can be that self-aware. Yes, and to hold ourselves as alchemists is a really powerful way of looking at it. Beautiful. Thank you. Thanks. All right, Ryan.
All right, looks like I have somebody who has their hand raised on Zoom, so I'll get to that in just 1 second, but I wanted to read this question that came in.
Okay.
Kind of switches the gear a little bit here,
Okay.
but I think it's important in the context of how does fear form, right?
Say that again. How does
fear form?
How
So
does-
I'm giving you some context here.
Okay.
So the question says, how do you prevent the state of fear and stay in the state of gratitude and peace when getting word of multiple family members getting diagnosed with cancer? And this person goes on to say that they've just recently had 3 members of their family within the 6 months. So I think this is also a good topic to bring up because fear can also take form too. What are your thoughts, Petra?
It's a great question, right? And I think the very first thing we should do is not be afraid of fear. Fear is a natural response. It's a natural response to things that seem dangerous to us, right? And so it's not that we shouldn't have fear. It's that we should recognize that our fear comes from our human experience. It comes from our human assessment of danger. There is danger to these people that we love. And the question is only, each time we feel the fear and we experience it, can we look the fear in the face and say, there is a higher truth than this danger that I'm afraid of? The higher truth is that we're alchemists. The higher truth is that we are co-creative. And so I'm going to absolutely engage in my spiritual tools. I'm going to over and over and over again work with the spiritual truths and work with seeing and believing in the intelligence of the universe, that its fundamental premise is wholeness, and that the particles can wink into existence in a new form, a non-cancerous form, right? And over and over and over again, we do that work. I don't know that it's possible to always stay in gratitude and peace. And quite frankly, I'm not sure I would want to flatline my life that way, right? There are reasons for strong emotions and for real passionate responses to things. And that's a part of the expression of life. Then we get to look at, is my fear well-founded? Well, it could be. So that just means that I have to move even more fully into my spiritual truth and use my spiritual tools. My experience is that peace and gratitude are the result of wrestling with my fear. You know, I'm going to say that again because that is a brand new insight that I'm having right at this very moment. And I'm finally understanding why it is that sometimes I worry about people who insist on always treating for peace and gratitude, because that's a bypass. I'm not actually dealing with the fear. It is in wrestling with the fear, in moving myself into a higher consciousness, a reality that's more resonant with spiritual truth. Peace and gratitude will be the result of that. But if all I'm focusing on is peace and gratitude, do you see I am not contributing to the actual alchemizing of my fear into faith, of my fear into trust, of my fear into, wait, I actually know that there's a higher reality that I can access and that I can use in support of my beloveds, absolutely knowing that the wisdom and intelligence of the universe works through the doctors, works through the procedures, works through anything and everything, works through the very cells of their bodies, and is absolutely restoring health and wholeness. And if I have to do that every day, if I have to do that 5 times every day, do you see I am absolutely setting a new cause in motion where my fear exists. But I have to work with that, and I have to aim it right where my fear exists, because where my fear exists shows me where I am not living from that higher truth. There's nothing wrong with it. It's a feedback mechanism that I am feeling and experiencing the human reaction to danger. And so I have to actually bring my spirituality to bear right there, instead of, well, I'm just going to be peaceful and grateful and peaceful and grateful and peaceful and grateful, which is great, but it's not actually alchemizing the situation into a higher reality, into a spiritual truth, which allows something new to be created. All I'm doing is making myself feel better. I have to remember what I just said. That was really good, because I have had...
Hey, you know, Peter, we record this every week. I just FYI.
Thank you. You know, I've tried to find and say that in the past, and it's never been so clear to me, right? Why we should not be afraid of our fear or our sadness or our depression. It shows us where our spiritual work is needed. Not that we should now turn over here and think about something different. Well, I'm going to withdraw and I'm only going to think peaceful thoughts, right? We should not be afraid. The science of mind says you look a fact in the face and you deny its spiritual reality, or I would say its spiritual necessity. Form is a necessity of that which is intending it. Spirit is always intending only the form of health and wholeness. Anything other than that is being intended or expressed by something which is not spiritual, which is not in alignment with life itself. And so there's no necessity for these forms, and we create new forms by focusing on a new spiritual necessity for expression. That is a great question. I'm so glad you asked that. I hope this is helpful to you. Remember that we also have our practitioners and our spiritual coaches who are always available to support you through these difficult times. That to think we don't have difficult times is nonsense. But we have spiritual support of people who can help us shift out of that place and apply our spiritual principles directly to the experience that we're having. Beautiful, thank you. Ryan, I think we might have time for that one comment.
We might. So before you get into that, though, I just want to send a reminder to everybody about that, because tonight, actually, on our Facebook Live page, you'll be able to join us for a special prayer that we're doing for Ukraine. So I just want to send that as a reminder. And for the folks here in the room, or for the folks located out here in Dallas, come and join us in the sanctuary. All of our practitioners will be here. So join us in the power of that, because you're right. Spirituality and spirit is seeking form, and we set our intention, we're giving it form. Right?
Yes, we're going to give it a new form. 5 o'clock Central Time.
5 o'clock Central Time.
Please join us. Yep, in an hour of really intentional co-creation.
And,
Thanks.
And I heard there might be cookies. I'm just saying. All right.
Cookies or soup.
All right. Connie, do you want to go ahead and unmute yourself and join the conversation?
Hi, Connie.
Hi, thank you. This is, again, amazing, an amazing conversation. I find myself saying a lot to friends and family in conversations in situations. Life is change, and it applies, and I'm saying it a lot. And we also have to navigate that change. We have to be flexible to navigate.
Yes.
And you get really, really good info today about how to navigate it. And I love, seeing the negativity that comes up in worry and all that, fear, as actually something informative
Yes.
It lets us know what it is that we need to work on. It's so good. Another thing I'd like to mention is that I'm kind of disjointed today, but anyway, another thing I'd like to mention is that I have a new strong intention, and I've been putting it into action for maybe even a year, to speak my truth. Oh my goodness. And it doesn't have to be harsh.
Right.
I go inside and it just comes and I speak it. I recently, just today and yesterday, had an upset with one of my cousins, and I just spoke my truth in a text message, and she came back in a beautiful way. And I thought maybe we were going to have to just not communicate for a while, or maybe forever. She came back, and I ended up my text to her with love, yes, love, Connie, and oh my
Beautiful.
goodness, it's amazing. And I feel like I'm just kind of teeter-tottering around and balancing things, but it's good.
Good. Beautiful. Thank you, Connie. What a lovely note to end our time on. It's so great to just realize it's a journey, it's just a walk, and we're continually having opportunities for spiritual practice. So join us in 30 minutes for our celebration. We will be addressing some of the issues in the world, some of the issues right here in Texas and in our nation. And bring our spiritual tools to bear. And then, as Ryan said, do join us at 5 o'clock tonight, Facebook Live, or here in the sanctuary. And we're having a prayer vigil, meditation, setting really deep intentions to create peace in the Ukraine and support the international collective consciousness for that. So we hope that you'll join us in 30 minutes or tonight at 5 p.m., both Central Time, the U.S. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll see you next week. Love having you guys here in the room as well. Bye for now.